Kari Wehrs, thank you for being the juror for the 2020 Emerge Student Exhibition. You have a Master of Fine Arts from ASU, go Sun Devils. But before that, with your undergrad work, you also went off and had some experience with the Maine Media workshops. And the Maine Media is obviously a very renowned organization. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience there?
So I started there in the summer of 2008. I was really looking for a place to just sort of dive deeper into photography. So I found myself there, and like many people who show up there summer after summer, I made connections and just, fell in love with this place and the energy and just the overall environment there. And so 2 years in a row, I was the teaching assistant for their professional certificate in photography, visual storytelling college program. And I guess I just acted like a sponge. I was there to absorb as much as I could from the artists and, the staff and the students, of course, that showed up. So it's this really amazing place.
Yeah. What I know you've been working on recently is a project called Shot, where you are taking photographs and telling a story. Tell us a little bit about why the medium. Tell us a little bit about Shot.
I was actually already doing the tintype process, or, was really familiar with it before Shot started. And I was making portraiture before Shot. But really, I got to the point where I was like, well, so what? It was sort of like you get to a level of good and you might pat yourself on the back and realize it is good, but how can you push it further? So I was actually looking for the object to become a little bit more sculptural. In the case of Shot, it becomes sculptural because I hand it over to the gun enthusiast participant, and I actually ask if they are willing or if they would like to shoot at their own portrait as target. And I think using a process that you really need to have control over every step felt like I was in so much control that I wanted to partly let go of control because of the process. But then, of course, you bring in the content of the work, the context, the social context, right? And the time span that I've been working on it, 2016 to 2020, seems pretty significant.
What I'd like to talk a little bit about is the looking at the work that was presented to you, almost 800 pieces, in the selection that you needed to make, and that came out to 77 images. How was that during process? How did your experience of teaching as a photographer, tell the story about what you chose?
I think my teaching experience, my experience with brand new, fresh students in a classroom definitely influenced my choices. So I'm always telling students that their voice is important. And I think that that doesn't matter, no matter age, background, whatever experiences you have or don't have yet in life, right? Your voice right now is important. But where I think that voice comes from in the student exhibition is related to visual storytelling. It's related to the work having to provoke a question, right? To either myself, about myself, or myself about that artist, or myself about the world, that artist about the world, right? All kinds of questions can kind of spin around, I think, within a photograph. I think that's really interesting. But I'm also attached to photographs that feel personal and that feel intentional.
So from the time you looked at the PDF, all digital on the computer screen, until the work was on the wall, how do you feel now about seeing the work kind of leaping out of the computer into a frame with a mat and glass and now presented?
It becomes real and it becomes professional, Yes, this is a student exhibition, but it looks good. It looks professionally placed, thought about. It feels cohesive in a lot of ways. So I think that, taking an image off of screen and being able to see it in its final presentation is really important. At its scale, that I can have a sort of one-to-one relationship with it, and also just sort of assess the quality of prints, and see the details and everything up close.
I always respect when I see the work on the wall that the juror didn't have the opportunity to actually see it presented, and presentation is a big part of it, but yet they still managed to make a wonderful selection of the best work for an exhibition. So I want to thank you very much. I just wanted to go through and acknowledge our sponsors. Obviously, Kari giving her time as a juror, giving her time to come and speak and talk to the artists that won Best of Show, Best High School, and Best Post High School. We also have awards for those levels. We have an award for Best of Show from Tempe Camera, and then Dennis and Kelly Collins for Best High School, and then Best Post High School is Charlene Engel. These are people who are patrons of the arts, patrons of photography, and I want to thank them. Without the team, we wouldn't have an exhibition.
Yeah.
So it's very critical. Thank you so much, Kari, and I very much look forward to continuing to watch you create work and present your work.
Thanks, and thank you for all that you do here. It is this amazing, active environment and supportive of the community and arts, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
As an introduction, will you share a little bit about your background and arts education?
I got my first camera my freshman year for Christmas. I got an old film camera from my grandpa, and so that's basically the only camera that I've really used for the past 4 years. And when I moved here from Chicago, the middle of my freshman year, I started taking the film photography class at my high school, and I basically took it all throughout high school with the same teacher, and he taught me everything, and we had the dark room and the studio and all of that. So yeah.
Your artist statement mentions your love for film photography. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay. Film, I feel like, is much more personal and hands-on than digital, and that's what I've always liked about it, that you do the whole process yourself, like hands-on, like rolling the film and the chemicals and printing yourself. And I feel like you don't get the same with digital, and the photos feel different. They feel more nostalgic and more authentic. So that's what I've always really loved about it.
Okay. So specifically about the piece in this show in Emerge, I'm curious about your experience of making the self-portrait. What were you thinking about when you looked into the camera, and why make the double exposure?
Well, the double exposure was an accident, actually. I was using a medium format camera, and I just forgot to advance the film to the next photo, so that was an accident, but it looked cool. Honestly, I was kind of bored that day, and I didn't really have anything to do, and I like just taking pictures of things like as is, and not like doing makeup and that kind of stuff. So I just kind of wanted to like document that day.
You've got this sort of directness and gaze into the camera. To me, the word I would associate with that is almost like a timeless aspect. So, I mean, even in hearing you say things like nostalgia, that's really interesting to me. Or that you were bored, and how boredom kind of leads to sort of experimentation. That all that strikes me as really cool. Were you thinking anything specific about like revealing something about yourself?
I feel like I take most of my pictures kind of for myself, just because I like documenting things and looking back on it and having it, 20 years later, I'll see it and be like, oh, this is what happened on that day, like that kind of thing. So I feel like that's sort of why I take pictures, like all the pictures that I do and those kind of pictures and stuff.
when you saw what I guess was a surprise in your photograph that's in the show, what was your reaction when you saw it?
I was excited because I wasn't expecting it, but because I do that a lot where I will just forget to advance the film, so there's a lot of like accidental double exposures, but that one just, it looked like different from, it was very clear and like distinct, and my teacher really liked it a lot, and my teacher was actually the one that made me submit that photo into this because I submitted a few. So
I really love thinking about just the element of time when I look at that. And I think too, you said nostalgia, I've said timelessness, but I wonder or imagine, you making a picture like that, like every 5 years of your life from now on, what does that look like? That's so interesting to me. So where do you envision yourself going from here? I know you have, life's all in front of you. Kind of tell us what you might predict being in your future for photography.
Okay, in the fall, I'm going up to Flagstaff. I'm going to the community college up there, and I'm hopefully going to be getting a job at the film developing place that they have there and doing that and using their darkroom and things like that. And I'll be studying art education, hopefully to become an art teacher or even like a film photo teacher maybe. So hopefully that is in the future, but just doing like photo shoots on the side and just regularly shooting like I do.
So a career in arts is something that you're thinking
Yeah.
seriously about. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great to hear.
Thank you.
I think what's kind of cool to hear from you is that you're open to like experimental nature of photography. And it's great to hear that you've got a lot to look forward to and to further your education with this as well. Yeah.
So I was a dancer for about 15 years, so I have a very strong connection between music, storytelling, and movement. And then about my sophomore year in college when I was at GCC, I eventually decided that it wasn't where my future was going, and I took a chance on a photography class.
That's great. That's an interesting mix of things. So I'm wondering if you will just sort of introduce your photograph, the award-winning photograph in the show, and discuss your intentions in creating it.
So Car Crash Rhetoric is based off of the song Cul-de-sac by the band The Wonder Years, which is my favorite band. And it's basically the idea of when you reconnect with somebody, you have to look at both the good and the bad that you experience with them before deciding if you want to move forward and becoming friends or lovers again. And I was going through that in my personal life, so I wanted to find a way to express it in photos and like hold it and be able to look at it.
Something that I thought a lot about when I looked at this photo, and maybe this shows that I'm getting older, but I really viewed this as this sort of reflection of like a particular youth attitude and life outlook. And I guess I'm just wondering if you've thought about it in that way. For example, the couple, the subjects of your photograph, they're not in their 50s, And so I guess I'm wondering, like, do you see this as sort of a stamp in time of kind of youth culture?
I would say a little bit, yes. Probably more personal in a way because they're my roommates. So it's almost like the stamp of this is where we were this summer doing this thing. And I think it's for sure a stamp of my youth. I don't know how it translates to others, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it that way. And like, I don't need to know those details, right? I just see it as this young couple in this time. Something else that I was, really drawn to in the photograph is there's sort of this interesting tension in the moment of this particular image, where their faces are almost expressionless, if they can be. Like, I sort of feel like they've walked out and they've said, well, that just happened, and again, like, to me that just screams youth culture right now, which is sort of it's not really a positive or a negative, it's just sort of an observation, I guess. Can you share the amount of pre-planning that went into the creation of this picture, and how do you feel about that part of your creative process? I'm assuming that is a part of your practice in general.
This one took at least 2 months, I want to say. Like, I started working on the idea in sometime that summer, and we shot in October last year. I was listening to the song over and over again, and I was always drawn in by the line, "It's car crash rhetoric, we fucked up everything we came in contact with." And then from there, I kind of, like I said, I was dealing with their own personal reconnection issue. And so they kind of just came together, and I started planning the idea. I saw it in my head, and then I made the bouquet, I found the dress, I found the shoes, I found the man in the photograph. We kind of picked his stuff from stuff we already had and kind of put it all together. And then that shot that day, we were having trouble with the car because the car that I was originally going to borrow that already had a dent in it, she didn't feel comfortable driving a different car, so we had to like switch it around last minute. And so it was a day.
Interesting. But that pre-planning, is that all really like exciting for you?
That's probably my favorite part, is because I have a 30-minute drive to work, so I'm just listening to my music the whole time. And sometimes if a song just catches me like that, I'll listen to it the whole drive and just keep picturing it. And so it's a huge part of the prep, to the point where I get sick of the song once the shoot is over.
Yeah, that's really great. That's so interesting. So what is next for you? Are you planning on making more sort of narrative storytelling kind of pictures?
This series in particular, I'm working on the 3rd installment of it right now. I'm in the early stages, and that's for this series specifically. In Next in general, is I have my portfolio review coming up next semester, that my spring final I'm going to be submitting, which is another narrative piece talking about a blood pact. And then from there, I'm also thinking about my senior exhibit already, and how I want that to look and how I want that to feel.
That's so great. Well, it's exciting. I'm going to keep looking for your work and try to follow you now. So thank you for this.
Thank
you. Again, congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for having this talk with us today. And of course, congratulations on your award in the show. It was great to see your photograph, and I'm really interested to hear more about it. As an introduction, will you just share a little bit about your background and your arts education?
I always start with saying that I'm from Mexico City. I'm an immigrant to the United States. I got here when I was 11, and I've been living in Phoenix for the rest of my time, except for a year when my husband and we lived in Washington State. My arts education got put on hold when I got married, and I took 2 semesters of classes at Phoenix College that was a long time ago. And then I went back when our last daughter was able to go to elementary school. When she started school, I started school. I didn't have a lab, a darkroom lab in my first college. I started at Estrella, and we didn't have a working lab, so we would work with film and develop it in the bathrooms, which we got in trouble for. We couldn't do that anymore. So we would scan film. So it was kind of a not a very clear learning path at the beginning. But then from there, I went to Glendale Community, and I stayed there for quite a while. I was afraid. It's always one of my things. I was afraid to take the leap, and I waited a while before applying to ASU. And then I went to ASU and got my bachelor's. And now I'm on track to go to grad school.
That's so great.
Thank you.
Was there any specific thing that sort of kept you going, especially in that earlier time period?
I think learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I think also I didn't get to finish high school. And it was one of my goals was to make it up to my mom, and I wanted to make sure to go back to and finish college. Education was always really important to my parents, and the sacrifice. And mainly my mom is the one who's home now, and so out of respect and that yearning to learn was definitely something she instilled in us, and I think that's what kept me going a lot.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so to talk a little bit about the photograph that is in Emerge, I'd like to hear about the inspiration for that particular photograph. And I'm curious about the significance of the title, Las Huellas de mi Gente.
Sometimes I have a clear idea of the image I want to make. This day I did not, and I headed towards this one area behind a canal that I live in the far West Valley, and I do have to trespass a canal. Shh, don't tell anybody. And there are these two big trees that I'd been photographing, and one of them is littered with a lot of garbage, and I'd been photographing, and then I was very moved by these two trees that are kind of one's leaning on the other, and I was thinking about strength and how long they'd been there and different things like that. And so I'd been photographing these two trees. And this day I went and they were chopped down because development is coming. And I was really torn about it. Suddenly I was like, they're gone. There were just pieces on the ground. So then when I left after being there for about an hour and a half, I started driving, and then agriculture, because there are a lot of fields, agricultural fields in the area. I just headed down straight south, and I was looking at the light, and I had spent so much time with these trees over by the canal. It was probably longer than an hour because the last rays of light were blanketed on the fields, and I just kept looking at it. And as I was driving, I just kept my eye on it, thinking how beautiful it looked. But then another part of me was saying, you've already been here. You've done this before. And I drove, it was about 8 miles. And then something I tend to do when I realize I'm not listening to myself, I hung a U-turn. I pulled over, I hung a U-turn, and I came back about 2 miles, and there was no reason why I chose the one spot, because it was like fields upon fields upon fields. And I stopped and I started photographing, and then I started walking into the fields, and then I found this scene, and I was struck myself by just finding it. I thought, oh my God, it's like I came out here to find this, and if I hadn't stopped, I would have never seen it. And then because the light was definitely gone by then, I went back to the car and got my tripod, and then came back. I knew that there was enough light left over that I could still make some images, and I made this one image. And I knew that this was the one image I was going to make that one day. The translation, it's like the footprints, my people's footprints. And what it means to me, when I saw it, because the footprints are coming, they're crusted mud of footprints embedded in the wet soil from the rains a couple days prior. The feeling I got was this idea that, yes, the title says mi gente, my people, because they're the people who work the fields and grow the crops. But for me, it meant they were coming out. And so there was kind of like a rebirth. They're finding their way out of those dreams are becoming a reality. These were just some things that I was thinking when I was there making this image.
Something that struck me, and part of the reason why I was particularly drawn to your photograph, was through the idea of labor. And I mean labor being obviously the partial content of the imagery, but also your labor in creating the photogravure. So I'm wondering if you can discuss the relationship between the content of the image and the photographic process and aesthetic that you chose to use.
There certainly is a parallel there because there is a lot of labor in photogravure, and it's something very present. It's a multi-step process, and each process reveals itself as you work. Each step reveals itself, and if you got it right, then you can go on. If you didn't, you have to go back and start over. And it's very much, and because the imagery is an agricultural image, because it's an image of planting something and growing it, because there's all these visual clues in the image. It's very much the same with the process. It's like there's a starting point, but every single step goes from there. And it's spent a lot of time working to make the image, and many times because I'm looking at the image and the story that I've not a story that I photographed, but the bigger implication. There's often this kind of, in myself when I'm working, there's a lot of reflective time as I work to make the image.
My last question for you is, what is next for you, or what are you currently working on and thinking about?
Well, I had to put photogravure on hold. That's one of the things I'm really interested in developing, further developing and making more work. I am currently working on printing on corn husks. I started also thinking of the history, the substrate as I'm thinking of the corn husk in Spanish, una hoja de maíz. Una hoja can be an hoja de papel, so it's just a leaf. So I think of it as a substrate, and it's fascinating to me how if you don't describe what kind of hoja you're using, then it's just a leaf, a paper, and so it's both. And so I started off printing some of my personal documents and a self-portrait that it's kind of in a in progress kind of way. And then I'm also printing plants from my memory of plants that are native to my mother's homeland and that she used when I was growing up. And so kind of all these things that instill memory. And so all held within this hoja de maíz.
Anything else from you, Elizabeth, I didn't cover that you want a chance to say?
I would say that Art Intersection was the first place I ever exhibited work, and I'm very, very excited to be here.